In this video, we're going to do an updated testing of all the policies that were broken from my previous policy testing video. Let's get right into it. Unfortunately, Cantons was not fixed yet. Let's cover why. I recruited all the troops for 2 weeks with and without the policy, and the final results were nearly identical, whereas it should have been 20% different. Looking at the town stats, we see a +1 for Cantons for a town, and in minus taxes under the settlement tax. But if we hop over to our castle, we do not see anything for the militia, and yet we still see the minus tax for the cantons. So in summary, the daily militia works for towns only, the recruit replenishment does not work at all, and the tax income reduction works for both castles and towns. This is a bad policy, don't take it. Now for some good news. If we look at the construction cost here in this town, this level 1 upgrade is going to cost 2,000, and in this castle, this barracks is going to cost 500. We go ahead and turn on the castle charter's upgrade, giving us a 20% reduction. And as expected, we see 20% less, costing only 400 for the castle, and only 1,600 at the town. So fortunately, they did not fix this policy, and it works for both castles and towns, with no downside. This is a great policy still. Charter of Liberties is supposed to increase the militia quantity and quality by 10%, but it also reduces local taxes by 5%. Looking at the total militia for this castle, we see 126, and for the town, 376. Unfortunately, with the policy, we still see 376 for the town and 126 for the castle. However, we don't see a line item under the settlement tax for towns, and again, nothing for castles under tax. Looking at the full financial page, there's no line item specifically for this policy. And unfortunately, Charter of Liberties is completely broken. Neither of these two work. Oh, and a quick side note, I also tested going into an actual siege to see if it made a difference. Maybe they only sprout up if a battle takes place, but that was not the case. Council of Commons is supposed to yield 0.1 influence per day to the settlement's owner clan for each notable, and it also reduces tax income by 5%. Castles don't have notables, but towns do, and in this case we have 5 notables in Marinoth and another 5 in Lageta. However, if we look at the influence ledger, we see a line item for 0.3 in the positive. So instead of getting +1, we're only getting plus 0.3. And if we go into the settlement tax for both towns and castles, we can see there is no line item for this policy. So fortunately, Council of Commons does work. However, it's difficult to say how the influence gain actually works, and there's no way to really tell. It's a pretty small difference. 0.3 isn't going to make much difference in a campaign. Crown Duty is supposed to pay a 5% tax on tariffs paid straight to the ruler, increase the trade penalty in towns, and decrease settlement prosperity by 1 per day. Purchasing this helmet is going to cost 27,015. Looking at that same helmet, we see a 27,015 purchase price, which means there's no difference in the trade penalty. And looking at the total income, we see Marinoth's tariffs at plus 179, that hasn't changed. There's still no line item specifically for this policy. However, we do see the -1 crown duty and prosperity for towns, but we also see it for castles. So overall, I was not able to find a plus 5% tariff paid directly to the ruler clan. It might be in there somewhere, but they don't label it anywhere, and it's really difficult to find. There's no higher trade penalties in towns, and settlement prosperity does decrease by 1 per day for both towns and castles, even though in the description it says specifically towns. Citizenship is supposed to increase loyalty for settlements that have the same culture as the owner clan. It also increases militia production by 1, but it decreases loyalty if the culture differs from the owner's clan. Through testing, we see that loyalty does indeed increase by 0.5 for towns, and it also worked for castles as well. Now looking at our matching culture fief, we see a plus 0.5 loyalty and a +1 militia. However, we also see a plus 0.5 loyalty for a castle and the +1 militia. Now if we go to our castle that does not have matching culture, we see a -0.5 in the loyalty, and we still see the +1 for militia. And again, the same thing at the town. We see a -0.5 under loyalty and a +1 under militia. Previously, this policy was linked to the faction ruler, not the individual owner. So it's nice to see that it works correctly. However, I do wish they would clean up the wording here and state that it works for both castles and towns. So be aware of that. Last time I spoke with a developer, they had mentioned King's Mercenary was not implemented yet. The ruling clan gains double influence from mercenaries is nonsense, because anytime mercenaries are hired, we do not get their influence. And non-ruling clans gain 10% less influence from battles, which is still the case. This policy is not working at all. Land grants for veterans is supposed to increase the militia quality by 10%, meaning instead of tier 2 militia, they will spawn in with tier 3 veteran militia. And the second part is supposed to reduce village tax income by 5%. Unfortunately, when you get into battle, militia are still all tier 2 for all 3 castles, towns, as well as villages. And measuring village income is very difficult, so it's hard to say if it actually reduces the income, but it certainly does not add a line item in here, which you would normally see if they calculate it that way. There's also no line item in a castle and no line item in the towns. So unfortunately, land grants for veterans is still 100% broken and not working. In Law Speaker's works, it's just that the numbers aren't quite correct. In this instance, we have a charm of 100 and we're getting a minus 0.5. If we pump that up to 101, it actually goes to plus 5. So it does still work, and the trigger is 101 and above, it turns on. However, the policy itself states plus 1 or minus 1, so it's off by half. Magistrates is supposed to increase security for towns by 1 per day and reduce taxes by 5% per day. And looking at the stats, we see a plus 1 for security and a minus 5% in the settlement tax. However, if we go to a castle, we see a plus 1 for security and again a line item for minus 5% for settlement tax. So this policy is working correctly, except for the fact that it carries over to castles and not just towns. Military Coronet is supposed to grant 20% more influence for military achievements. So anytime you win a battle, you're supposed to get 20% more influence. It also increases your troop wages by 10%. Fighting these 5 looters gives us 0.47 base renown. And if we auto-resolve again with the policy, we see the same 0.47 base. We see our main party wages at 240 without the policy. Main party wages increases to 264. So unfortunately, military achievements does not grant 20% more influence. However, the troop wages does increase by 10%. This policy is busted. War tax is supposed to give 5% of all settlements tax income to the ruling clan, as well as lose 1 prosperity per day and increasing the influence cost of declaring war by 100%. Without the policy, it costs 200 influence to start a war vote. And here with the policy enacted, it costs 300, so it's only 50% more, not 100%. We do see the -1 to town prosperity, and unfortunately we see it here on the castle prosperity as well. And again, looking on the income chart, it's very hard to say if the income is actually flowing to us. It's possible they do it on the back screen without letting us know, which means we would have to account for every penny that comes in and goes out, compare the two, and see if there's a difference. My bet is it doesn't work. It doesn't look like the ruler gets any kind of benefit from this policy. Both towns and castles lose prosperity per day, and the influence cost only goes up by 50%, not 100%. It's still broken. So to wrap it all up, the only policy that was fixed was citizenship, which actually had a line item in one of the patch notes previously. None of these other policies were fixed in the recent launch release, which is quite disappointing considering my policy testing video was released well before that. I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to testing it again once all these are fixed. We'll see you in the next one.